G'day mate, 40 here. Seems silly that every time I click to go live on YouTube, I have to click that this video is not made for kids. It was part of some big legal settlement that YouTube made. And now, every time I go live, any creator has to click, not made for kids. So, the news media is in an uncomfortable position right now, finding out how vulnerable they are because there are fewer jobs in journalism now than there were in 2017. And many elite journalists are saying amongst themselves, wow, if Donald Trump is elected, that means half the country is not listening to us, is not taking direction from us. That all our good reporting is not affecting their choices, that they are oblivious to what we're telling them about the dangers of Donald Trump. And this reminds me of a video I made probably a couple of years ago. Vladimir Putin is vulnerable. We're all vulnerable, right? Journalists are upset to realize how much they depend upon the goodwill of their readers, of their audience, of their consumers, people who buy their product. And anyone who's in business recognizes that you're vulnerable to the people who buy your product. But journalists have so long enjoyed an insulated existence because of a quirk of distribution that for a century it was a cost-efficient way to advertise your wares and to place classified ads through the medium of the newspaper. Now that quirk is gone because now there are much more effective ways to place your advertising and to direct it towards likely customers than advertising in newspapers. And journalism has never paid for itself. Right? Journalism benefited from that quirk of distribution. Journalism, strong, traditional, hard-hitting journalism has always depended upon being subsidized either by the government or by the tabloid and sports side of coverage. The New York Times is subsidized by people who want its recipes and crossword puzzles. And academic work, intellectual labor, journalism almost never pay for themselves. That's the harsh nature of reality. And if you're living in a world of delusion, right, reality is going to be very painful. And many journalists think, wow, if people vote for Donald Trump, they're obviously getting their news from sources outside of us. That's not necessarily true. Right? We all have people that we take seriously in some things and that we don't believe in other things. So I believe that the Los Angeles Times does good journalism on the Los Angeles Dodgers. Right? There's a lot of good reporting in the Los Angeles Times. I don't favor its left-wing bias. Right? That doesn't speak to me. I don't trust the left-wing orientation of the Los Angeles Times, the other elite media, but I recognize that there are many areas where they do a good job. Just as my friend Joe Blow, he is reliable in some things, and he's unreliable in other things. I listen to him carefully in some things, and I dismiss everything he says in other areas. So in some ways, this is the golden age of citizen journalism, in that all sorts of individuals are starting up their Substacks, they're firing out their Patreons, and producing a product that pays for itself. That's quite rare, quite extraordinary, but there are more opportunities to share your experiences, your reality, your hero system with anyone in the world. So many of the news media find that they're tired. They're tired of dealing with Donald Trump, and now they're gearing up for 4 more years. I notice this throughout the elite liberal media right now. There is a growing realization that Donald Trump is going to win next Tuesday, and people are trying to figure out how they'll deal with it. Now, the last time around, ironically, Trump produced a Trump bump. There's much more attention paid to news because, far from wanting to be a dictator, Donald Trump loves a good fight. And yeah, he's called the news media the enemy of the people. But you can't just reduce his attitude to the news media to one saying. He goes out of his way to grab news media attention. He grants so many interviews to the news media. And last time around, news media got a vast bump in subscriptions and viewers because Donald Trump is a compelling personality. Right? He's the world's #1 celebrity. And many journalists are concerned there won't be another Trump bump this time around. And I do think it's hard to sustain hysteria for 9 years over Donald Trump. Right? All those who are hysterical about what a major threat Donald Trump was to the republic, to the free world, right? They didn't find much reality to justify their hysteria. And so it's difficult to maintain that level of panic year in, year out. So what's your sense? I don't think that the hysteria is being quite as intense this time around. Donald Trump is certainly appearing like a winning candidate. He's happy, he's joyous. His campaign's on message. Kamala Harris looks like a losing candidate. She lacks confidence. Her campaign's just trying to ride news cycles, throw whatever sticks against the wall. And ironically, her biggest super PAC, right? Her biggest political action committee believes that the message that Donald Trump is a fascist is not going to be a winning message. That people are much more concerned about economics, about paying the bills. About half of Americans live close to paycheck. And in that kind of reality, you're not going to be concerned about abstract threats to democracy. What's interesting is that Donald Trump gets a lower share of the white vote than other Republican presidential candidates. So Donald Trump is going to do better among Latinos and blacks than any other Republican candidate. And he's likely to do worse among whites than Mitt Romney and your average Republican candidate. Because the one voting bloc that no major political party will pander to or reach out to or craft message to or develop policy for white Americans. That they are the one group that it's completely permitted to just hate on, despise, trash, ignore, and to deny that they're even a group with their own group interests. One of the fundamental iron rules of life is that different groups have different interests. Different groups tend to experience the world differently and will have different priorities that will produce different communities. So yesterday I talked about what a flourishing country Lebanon was when it was dominantly a Christian country. And then when you had a flood of Palestinian refugees pour into Lebanon and they started slaughtering Christians in the thousands, and Lebanon tipped to being a majority Muslim country, and it tipped into disaster. So when you think of communities and countries that have tipped from Christian to Muslim, how many have become more prosperous, more free, more cohesive? I can't think of many. And when you look at neighborhoods as well, if a neighborhood tips from white to black, or from black to Latino, or from white to Muslim, All right, what does it say about the various groups when there are certain predictable patterns that you notice when a neighborhood tips? And I don't think there are indelible essential qualities to being white or Christian or Muslim or black. But at a certain time, a certain place, right, there are predictable effects when a neighborhood tips from white to black. It happened in 90035, so near the 10 freeway and La Cienega Boulevard. Right, this neighborhood was about 98% white up until 1960. It was about 90% Jewish, flourishing neighborhood, and its local high school was an elite academic institution. And in the 1960s, you had forced busing to this elite high school, and with the forced busing, you had a massive influx of black families into the neighborhood. Suddenly, you had a dramatic increase in crime. You had the destruction of education at the local high school. You had the rise of the massive drug trade. And then the LAPD brought in innovative policing so that if you're a member of a gang, right, you're not allowed to be seen publicly in certain areas with other members of a gang. And this was a policing tactic that was copied all through the United States based on what the LAPD did in La Cienega Heights. Now, when LA went woke about 2010, they reversed this policy. But as long as the LAPD was tracking, they found that the overwhelming majority of young black men between 18 and 22 were members of gangs in Los Angeles. So there's a general trend in LA of many black communities going Latino, majority Latino. And when they do that, the overall crime rate goes down. All right, let's look at the chat. Trump, 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 says the chat. Okay, we got a screaming homeless woman in the background. Great. We're about half a mile from UCLA, walking around the park next to the Veterans Affairs Administration. So just imagine the chutzpah on the part of journalists who are now shocked that the country isn't listening to them, is very likely to vote in Donald Trump, and think that just because people read your newspaper that they're going to follow your political lead. Doesn't necessarily happen that way. People did not evolve to be gullible. So even when you have a news media that is overwhelmingly on the left, right, you've got in the elite news media probably 20 voters for the Democratic Party for every one Republican voter. It doesn't change many minds. And so many media executives are panicked that the business model for journalism is dying or dead. And they have no sense of historical context, that there was never a business model for journalism. It's never paid its own way. It's always dependent upon subsidies. And journalists are shocked to find out that they depended on the goodwill of their readership, of their customers. Like, we're all more vulnerable than we think we are, not just journalists. Right? I was watching the World Series at a sports bar, and a man in front of me picked up a phone that had fallen on the floor, and he started asking the women around me, "Oh, is this your phone? This your phone?" They all said, "No, no, no." And then I suddenly realized, hey, that's my phone. Right? My phone fallen out of my pocket. It's on the floor. People could have stepped on it, crushed it, broken it, and a complete stranger, right, some Latino dude, like, picked it up, rescued it for me. Right? So we all depend on the kindness, or at least goodwill, or at least lack of active opposition of other people. If your neighbors all hate you, it'll be very difficult to keep living in your neighborhood. And it can be anxiety producing to recognize how much vulnerability we have. So we normally blind ourselves to it. And we have an exaggerated sense often of our own importance, our own capability, and our own safety. And in reality, the world around us is far more dangerous than we think. Now, people on the right, conservatives, Republicans, Trump voters, nationalists, tribalists, our greatest fear is disorder and crime and filth and impurity and contagion. And so there's a particular part of the brain that lights up when we're facing a threat. I think it's called the anterior cingulate. So there's evidence that people on the right have a larger anterior cingulate than other people. Many of our political predispositions are based in our genetics. People on the left, their greatest fear is ignorance and bigotry, lack of education. And we've had this massive increase in homelessness and crime in Los Angeles over the past 6 years. And many of my friends are fleeing LA, mainly for Florida, for South Florida, for areas around Miami. That was exciting last night. My Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series. So I came to America in 1977, and I come from a strict Seventh-day Adventist background. And when I first came to the Napa Valley, I didn't know many people, so I'd spend my days in the local library. And I started out reading books on World War II. And then I started reading books on Weimar Germany, but they were a little too sexually stimulating. So I shifted to going through the archives of Life magazine, and I went through the archives of Time magazine, then Newsweek, and then Sports Illustrated. And so I started reading about the Yankees-Dodgers clashes of two great World Series in 1977 and 78. And the Dodgers just seemed much more wholesome, seemed like a good Christian team. And as I thought of myself as a good Christian, I thought, I'm going to be a Los Angeles Dodger fan. And at the same time, I became a Dallas Cowboys fan because Roger Staubach and Tom Landry, they seemed like good Christians. And so this was a way of reconciling my Christianity at the time with the excitement of sports. So when the Dodgers won in 1981, Fernando Valenzuela's rookie season, there's never been anything like his first about 8 starts where he allowed about 2 earned runs. And the Dodgers beat the Yankees finally. I was 15, 1981. Then I was at UCLA in 1988. I was doing my homework, I think on a Saturday night, when I heard a roar all around me at all the different dormitories. That was when Kirk Gibson hit a home run in the bottom of the 9th to help the Dodgers beat the A's, and they'd go on to win that World Series. And I was living in LA at the time, I was attending UCLA. In 2020, I was living in LA, and the Dodgers won just before Donald Trump lost the election in that shortened COVID season when the playoff games were taking place in Texas. But this was a particularly gritty Dodger team. It was amazing to see all the mistakes and the errors that the Yankees were making. I turned off the game last night when the Dodgers were down 5-0. And I started watching an Amazon Prime series called Seventh Game. And I was watching this series on, I think, the 2003 seventh game between the Yankees and the Red Sox. And I'd periodically just check my phone At one point, I noticed that the score had changed to 5-1, and I saw the score had changed to 5-3, and the bases were loaded. That's when I turned the game back on. What a stunning 5-run, I think, 5th inning for the Dodgers. And the Yankees made 3 crucial errors. It lasted 17 minutes. I was able to rewind. I get my cable TV through YouTube TV, and I was able to rewind and just watch that whole amazing inning. And it's striking how sound that the Dodgers' fundamentals were. Right? They did the right things defensively. They paid attention to the details and how sloppy the Yankees were, with Aaron Judge dropping that routine fly ball. And then the pitcher failing to cover first base. Just a stunning series of errors for the Yankees. And then Walker Buehler, who hasn't pitched well in about 2 years. He had an ERA near 6 this season. And then he comes in and gets the save in the 9th inning. Wasn't expecting that. So Mark Halperin is predicting a major mental health crisis on the left when Donald Trump wins. Because so many people on the left will feel alienated from their own country and from their fellow Americans. Now, I think that this mental health crisis will be limited to fewer than 5% of people on the left, because most people don't allow politics to dominate their lives. Now, of those who do allow politics to dominate their lives, they're disproportionately likely to be on the left. And so they're disproportionately vulnerable to outcomes happening over which they have no control, that then determine their happiness level. So for people on the right, their lives are much more likely to revolve around religion, family, their work, their friends, their community, their hobbies. Right? These are things that you have a substantial measure of control over. But I don't know about you. When I was watching the World Series last night and the Yankees surged to a 5-0 victory, as a Dodger fan, I had no desire to feel the pain of watching the Dodgers potentially let this World Series slip away. So I turned it off. Right? So I expect for many people on the left, they're going to turn off their desire to be overly involved in politics. Right? Doesn't that just make sense as a way to reduce the pain? If Donald Trump wins, and that's incredibly painful for you, then pay attention to something other than politics. Get interested in your own life. Volunteer. Put more attention into your work, your family, your friends, your hobbies. So I'm sure there will be a mental health crisis for many people on the left, those who are overly invested in politics, who get so much of their meaning and purpose and sense of righteousness in life from politics. They don't change that. Yeah, that will lead to a mental health crisis. But for many other people on the left, this may well be a healthy dose of reality that encourages them to become more mature and to redirect their focus to areas of life that they have far more control over. So let's say you're on the left, you're devastated that Donald Trump wins. Maybe you'll take up jogging. Maybe you'll take up some other hobby or sport. You'll take up volunteering. You'll choose to become more active in your church or synagogue. You'll become more active with your family, your extended family, your community. You'll learn a foreign language. Maybe you'll turn off the news. I think it might be difficult for me to pay sustained attention to the news if Kamala Harris is elected president, because she seems to me like the lowest IQ, least articulate person who would ever hold the presidency in my lifetime. So, on the one hand, you can see why this Trump election victory would result in a mental health crisis, but for many other people on the left, it will probably be the very stimulus they need to a healthier approach to life. It's always painful changing your habits and your patterns, but often when you get out of the rut that you're in, your life dramatically improves. Right? Some people lose a job, and then things dramatically get better. Right? You go get a better job, or you recognize that you should go work for yourself, or that you need to go back to school, or you need to learn some new skills, or you need to move, or you've got sufficient savings, maybe take a trip overseas, go on a lengthy vacation, figure out what's most important to you. So, many people on the left, this will be an opportunity for them to reevaluate what really matters in their life. And for most people, it's maladaptive to have an excessive preoccupation with politics. I have an above average preoccupation with politics because I enjoy it. Right? Following politics serves the same function for me that following basketball or playing chess or playing video games does for other people. We all like doing the things that we're good at. I think I'm pretty good at detecting narratives and false narratives in politics and elsewhere. I'm interested in power, how it works, how it doesn't work. It's a recreation for me. It's a hobby. And I don't get overly invested in outcomes. Right? When Joe Biden won the 2020 election, I was sad for a few hours, maybe even a day or two. But very quickly my happiness level just went back to normal, because I don't invest my meaning and my purpose and my identity in political outcomes over which I have no control. And so Donald Trump victory would be a salutary blow for many people on the left. It will probably jog them out of a delusion that their meaning and purpose and identity in life is just wrapped up in politics. And for many journalists, it will be healthy for them to recognize how little they understand half the country that supports Donald Trump. It may provoke some self-reflection. We may get a wider number of conservative voices in the news media. I've heard reports that Jeff Bezos recognizes that there are a lack of conservative voices in the Washington Post, particularly its editorial op-ed side. And so there will be more right-wing pundits getting space in the elite news media if Donald Trump wins. And so it'll be painful for these journalists, but often the pain might provoke the introspection that's necessary to do better quality work. And you know, with Donald Trump as president, there will be a lot of things to write about. Steve Sailer noted in 2016 that if Trump won that election, that his fingers would be worn down to a nub, because he expected to be blogging so much about the Trump presidency. Because Trump is the least inhibited major politician of which I'm aware. And so he often says real things, right? Painful, inconvenient, awkward truths that other politicians just ignore or deny. And it's intoxicating. Some of those of us on the right to hear real talk from an American president. Someone who does not cower and bow down to political correctness. I mean, just the level of courage that this man has to stand up under the onslaught directed at him. And to think we probably would not be here with Trump in such a strong position if the Democrats had not mounted lawfare campaign to put him in prison, to change the laws, to pursue a politicized justice. Right? That caused a reaction on the part of Trump supporters. This is why traditionalists, religious people, tribalists, nationalists, people on the right, conservatives, Republicans, a little more skeptical about the power of reason. Because you can reasonably plot out a course of action like so many highly intelligent, experienced Democrats did to deny Donald Trump an opportunity to run for election. And what happens instead is that through all their efforts, it just provoked a backlash that gave Trump the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, now seems set to hand him a presidential victory. And if there hadn't been so much overreach by the news media, right, it's highly likely that Donald Trump would not be in a stronger position. So you can rationally, reasonably, strategically, autonomously, reflexively, cognitively plan out various courses of actions, but you never know how other people are then going to respond. And the Democratic Party overreach in their efforts to shut down Donald Trump and their massive amount of denial that Trump's appeal is 100% on substance. Right? A wise Democrat would have recognized that Trump's appeal is 100% on substance. That Trump was brave in speaking out against forever wars, against the trend of his party, in speaking out the case for fair trade policies, for renegotiating NAFTA to benefit the least educated American workers, and for tackling the issue of immigration, which most politicians wanted to just leave for the experts. They didn't want to touch it because particularly conservatives and Republicans are so afraid of being tarred racist because there is no safe answer for the accusation that you're a racist, that you're a fascist, that you're a Nazi. Right? It's very hard to rhetorically defend yourself, so Republicans and conservatives are much less likely to speak out on politics in social settings because at any moment they're going to be called a racist, fascist, and a Nazi, and there's no predictable, strong line of defense for them, and so conservatives tend to stay quiet in social discussions, and they fear talking about anything that could bring on such heinous charges. But it took someone with the strength and the courage and the balls of Donald Trump to go where other Republicans were too afraid. And when you do that, you fill other people with courage. It's contagious. Courage is courageous, contagious, just like cowardice is contagious. Criminals need to serve their time. Absolutely. We can control our crime rates on the basis of how much we're willing to punish criminals. It's not a coordinated effort. That's ridiculous what you're saying. The state of New York passed a law that enabled the Trump prosecution on all those felony counts. So there was some degree of coordination, and there was certainly ideological coordination. And it is backfired. Right? There were few elites on the Republican Party side who wanted to see Donald Trump nominated again in 2024. But Trump's popularity and fundraising just took off once Alvin Bragg in New York brought prosecution. And when I listened to the Bob Woodward latest book on Biden's foreign policy and the way that the Biden team just tried to micromanage Ukraine and Israel's wars, and on how almost every point where they tried to restrain Israel, it turned out to be dramatically wrong. It's hilarious, the overconfidence in the power of reason and strategic autonomy of the buffered, reflexive, enlightenment, liberal elite mind that thinks that it can figure out right and wrong on its own and strategically plot a path forward and micromanage Israel's seven-front war for survival. And on how on almost every issue, Biden administration turned out to be wrong. He said, don't go into Gaza, Israel went into Gaza. Don't go into Rafah, Israel went into Rafah. They discovered that Egypt had been allowing in a massive amount of arms for Hamas. That's why Egypt was so opposed. One thing you don't get in Bob Woodward books is judgment, right? He just largely writes down what people tell him. And Woodward concludes his latest book by saying Donald Trump is absolutely unfit to lead this country. That he has repeatedly shown that he's a threat to the world and to America. And Trump does say crazy things. But as a liberal who places a great deal of faith in reason, right, Bob Woodward got taken in by the reasonable sounding nature of Biden's foreign policy team. And they do sound reasonable. They are articulate. They are well educated. They are smooth talkers. They are masters of the careful critical discourse that is the sign of being an educated person in the United States and the West today. But because he put too much value on words and reason and rhetoric and intentions and motives and education, all right, he got fooled. The Biden foreign policy team is the biggest American foreign policy disaster that the United States has ever had. All right, John Mearsheimer says that our backing of Ukraine is 10 times the disaster that our 2003 invasion of Iraq was. But they sounded so articulate, they sounded so reasonable and rational, they sounded even inspiring, standing up for democracy. So the Biden team had the rhetoric down. It's just the performance on the ground was so abysmal. And there's absolutely no correlation between what sounds good and what does good, what feels good and what does good, what's emotionally appealing, what fits in with the accepted rhetoric of the day by our elite, and what actually leads to better results for Americans. So I wonder if the Trump resistance will be nearly as effective this time around. So once Trump was elected, it seemed like the resistance to Donald Trump was overall far more effective than Trump's side's ability to get things done. This time, I sense that the Trump team is better equipped to get things done. They're better prepared to deal with the resistance, that they are ready to replace many members of the deep state and the civil service with their own supporters. And that's not necessarily going to lead to great results, right? You may take out efficient, effective civil servants and replace them with Trump supporters who are not nearly as effective and efficient. So I had Elliot Blatt come on my show a couple of weeks ago and said, you think Trump will go hardcore once he takes power this time? Will he just be ruthless? And I said, well, I hope he's effective. And to be effective, sometimes you have to bite your tongue. To be effective, sometimes you have to compromise. To be effective, sometimes you have to be willing to take 70% of your goal. Sometimes to be effective, you have to be ruthless and refuse to make a deal. And other times to be effective, you have to know when to compromise. So my biggest concern about a Trump administration is, will it be effective? Will it accomplish its goals? I have no doubt that it will make some progress. But whether it makes 5% progress or 50% progress, that's the open question. Will we get hundreds of miles of border wall built? Will we only get the 140 miles of new border wall that was built the last time Trump was in office? How many Supreme Court justices will Trump get to select? It's interesting that neither candidate, Kamala Harris nor Donald Trump, are talking about the type of Supreme Court justices they'll select. That seems crazy. Such a vital issue. But the Trump campaign is not talking about the Supreme Court because they are so concerned about the backlash over the Dodd decision reversing a nationwide right to abortion. And so you can understand that strategically, but there may well be no more important reason to vote for Donald Trump than his selection of judges. And Donald Trump could get to select up to 3 new U.S. Supreme Court judges this term and leave an imprint on the court that will last for decades, preserving free speech and reducing the power of the executive to just unilaterally forgive student loans. I mean, think about the millions of Americans who worked hard to pay off their student loans. Now the Biden administration comes along and wipes away the loans of people who are less conscientious, less hardworking, less dedicated, less righteous, less committed, less pro-social, more irresponsible. Right? It's these government policies that reward the antisocial, the reckless, and effectively penalize those who work hard and do the right thing that I find obnoxious. Right? We need government policies that reward people for doing the right thing and that punish people for doing the wrong thing. Someone commits a violent crime. On average, they've committed 15 similar violent crimes before now. This was just the one that they got caught on. So once someone commits a violent crime, you need to put them away for life. Or if they commit murder, you need to execute them. And if we did something like this, we would dramatically reduce the crime rate, the murder rate. America would be a dramatically safer country to live in. We would have more social trust and social cohesion. The quality of life would soar. The economy would dramatically benefit. People would participate more in wider society. They'd be more open to helping other people because they would be in less of a defensive crouch. So walking around UCLA right now, this is where I went to school in 1988-89. I saw Jesse Jackson speak right over here. You had the George H. Herbert Walker, H.W. Bush debated Michael Dukakis here in the 1988 presidential campaign. You had the UCLA Bruins behind quarterback Troy Aikman as the number 1 ranked college football team in the nation for several weeks. No signs of the anti-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas hysteria that swept through the campus last spring. You have a lot more security on campus. University administrators have a lot more clarity on cracking down on shanty towns and on anti-Israel groups that stop access to students depending on their political beliefs, such as Zionist or non-Zionist. UCLA has always been a gorgeous campus. You had administrators who would walk around the campus at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., and they'd pick up any rare piece of trash that they saw. If they noticed anything out of place, they'd give a note to the custodial staff. When people pick up the trash, when you don't have broken windows, when maintenance is kept up, right, it creates a certain atmosphere that discourages criminal and antisocial behavior. It's called broken windows policing. And liberals on the left generally hate broken windows policing because it disproportionately affects those groups that break a lot of windows unnecessarily. Let's go to the chat. Bro, it's time for a dance break. Exactly why I'm voting for Harris. Doesn't make sense for a felon to lead us. Right, you realize that most of us commit several felonies a week. That our legal system is so complicated that we're all inadvertently committing felonies. And that's why prosecutors have a great deal of discretion about what type of cases they bring. And they choose to prosecute Donald Trump in New York on grounds that very few people can understand. Yeah, you got your felony convictions, and you also helped to elect Donald Trump as president. So enjoy the backlash. For every action we take, there's a reaction. Other people are not passive. Trump supporters are not potted plants that you can treat any way you want, and they don't respond. The news media so wanted to run for days and days and days on the comments of an insult comic, Tony Hinchcliffe, and what he said about Puerto Rico being an island of trash. Well, the Biden administration has directed prosecutions at Puerto Rico for the vast amount of trash that it's allowed to build up. So it seems that Puerto Rico does have a trash problem, and that there was a basis in reality for the insult comic's remarks. And the news media wanted to focus on that day in, day out. And they wanted other Republicans to be held to account for what this one insult comic, this one Don Rickles imitator had said. And then it was so dispiriting for the news media when Joe Biden clearly came out, clearly stated that Trump supporters were garbage. And the Washington Post and many other elite media tried to spin the remarks as, oh, he didn't say Trump supporters are garbage. He said that one Trump supporter was garbage. That's not what Biden said. The White House even put out an inaccurate transcript of Biden's remarks to try to water them down. And the completely different way that the news media would handle the comments of Joe Biden when they were talking to Democrats. Right, they would give them softball questions like, is this hurting your message? But when it comes to Republicans, do you disavow the remarks of Tony Hinchcliffe? Who's that Stossel, John Stossel, former 2020 correspondent on ABC Libertarian, came out with a good video yesterday on the different way that the news media speaks to Republicans and Democrats, how they interrupt and heckle, hassle, and verbally assault Republicans routinely. While Democrats get such, warm tongue baths. Ryan Godusky was on Megyn Kelly's show today. Talked about how Abby Phillips, the host of the CNN show that he appeared on 3 times, that she'd talk off air how much she was looking forward to attending the inauguration of the first black female president. And on the Abby Phillips hosted show that Ryan Godusky has now been banned from CNN for a joke that he said to Media-san, I hope your pager doesn't go off, and Media-san spun that into, you're saying I should be killed. But the preceding few minutes was all about how Republicans were a bunch of fascists and Nazis. And that's completely acceptable civil dialogue from CNN's perspective. But Ryan Godusky's joke, hope your page doesn't go off, that's what crosses the line of civility. It's funny, Media-san was so hurt by Ryan Godusky's remark that he walked off the set. To the best of my knowledge, I have not been offended by anyone's politics, or by anyone's humor, or by anything in my life. I've certainly had my feelings hurt. I've certainly disagreed with many things that have been said. But the idea that I would take offense, that I would feel personally hurt, that someone had a different hero system from me, different sense of humor, different sense of the sacred, different religious and political and cultural views than me. It's just foreign. I don't understand people who get offended. Because to the best of my knowledge, I've never been offended in my life. At night, I've been listening to an audible version of the new biography of Mitch McConnell, Cocaine Mitch, the longtime Senate Republican leader. It's an interesting book, but not so interesting that it keeps me awake. So I just drift in and out of sleep while listening to this biography of Mitch McConnell. And he had polio for 2 years. So he was basically bedridden between ages 2 and 4. And the suggested treatment at that time was that he should not attempt to walk while he had polio. And there are lingering after effects of polio. But the 1950s attitude was if you have polio or some other disability, well, has dealt you a harsh turn, you do your best to overcome it. And when you learn about Bob Dole's story, right, he had a war wound that immobilized him, caused him agony, made one of his arms largely useless throughout his life. And there's such a more stoical attitude back in the 1950s. It was the opposite of the victimhood attitude that just swept through America in the 1960s. And I am not some unabashed fan of stoicism. Right? I think stoicism has some strengths and weaknesses. That a denial of pain and what you're going through and suffering, and suppressing the desire to share that pain or express that pain. I don't think that's necessarily a superior way to go. I don't think stoicism is just inherently a great attitude towards life. But between stoicism and looking for a victimhood identity, between those two options, I think the stoical option is far superior. So there's just a moderate amount of rioting last night in Los Angeles. One metro bus was set alight. But thank God nobody was killed in the celebration of the Dodgers' victory. I wanted to run out on the streets. But I live in a Jewish neighborhood. People aren't rioting in the streets after the Dodger victory. And in certain places, I probably would have gone outside and tried to join in the celebration. But then in LA, you start thinking, maybe not such a safe choice. but compared to other celebrations, this one was mild. The police were more prepared. They blocked off certain streets. And different neighborhoods celebrated the Dodger win in different ways. Right? There are some neighborhoods where committing crime was widely expected as a reaction to the Dodger victory. And then in Beverly Hills and in Jewish neighborhoods, right, people don't go out committing crime to celebrate a sports team victory. Right? In Jewish neighborhoods, Jews don't go out and light metro buses on fire to celebrate a victory. There is this politically correct narrative that was furthered by the ESPN documentary on Fernando Valenzuela, that prior to Fernando, that Mexican Americans didn't really care for the Dodgers because of the discrimination that was exercised when Dodger Stadium was built, and a certain small community of Latinos was moved out to make room for Dodger Stadium. But it's a politically correct narrative that's not based in much reality. Mexican Americans in Los Angeles were huge Dodger fans long before Fernando Valenzuela. And the erection of Dodger Stadium wasn't any more an ethnic cleansing than any other major construction project. And it's not a good sign for your neighborhood or your group if your group goes out committing crimes after your team wins. That did not used to be a thing in America. The way that fans would celebrate a victory was to go out and commit crime. So this didn't happen nearly so much in 1950s America. So in many ways, morality was superior in the 1950s and 1960s America. Right up until the 1960s, people in the San Fernando Valley did not need to lock their homes and lock their cars. And so it's the higher crime neighborhoods that seize on any opportunity to go out and commit crime. It's an indictment of the people in these neighborhoods that this happens so routinely. And the police were prepared. They knew which neighborhoods would go out there and start committing crimes to celebrate a Dodger victory in the World Series. So another example of left-wing overreach. Remember the massive deplatforming that happened after Charlottesville and then after January 6th? And so many Republicans found that they didn't have a social media platform that they could speak freely on. Donald Trump was banned from almost all of the major social media platforms. As a result, Republicans developed their own platforms. So Republicans are less vulnerable to the manipulations of the liberal elite and their control of major social media. I remember feeling quite strangled with all the speech restrictions on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter after January 6th. I remember I'd get videos removed and I'd get a strike for saying that there's not much effectiveness in wearing a mask outdoors. Right? That if you're going to benefit from a mask to reduce the risk of COVID contagion, right, I can much more see the case for it indoors, but not outdoors. I got a strike. Right? I got my video pulled down by YouTube for noting the obvious fact that wearing a mask outdoors is not going to change your risk of catching COVID or spreading COVID. Many other people got strikes, videos removed, and got banned from social media for suggesting that the cause of COVID was a lab leak. Now, YouTube has recognized that it overreached, and so you can now make arguments and points about vaccine effectiveness and the effectiveness of various public health measures with regard to COVID and other diseases, right, much more freely and openly on YouTube. And in part, that's because people on the right developed their own social media platforms, such as Rumble. And YouTube didn't want to lose its audience. And so YouTube, Facebook opened up speech. Right, I find YouTube a much freer place. I don't recall receiving a strike on YouTube for about 3 years. Oh, the last strike I got on YouTube was when I interviewed this Australian who wrote a book called The Wasp Question, blanking on his name right now, but he was a COVID dissident. And I uploaded an interview with him and immediately got a strike because he was questioning the conventional public health advice with regard to COVID. I think that was the last strike I got. So many media executives are aghast that the massive wave of deplatforming of Republicans that they supported after January 6th has resulted in Republicans effectively creating their own and seizing their own social media platforms such as X and Rumble. And now people can get their news and information from a wider variety of sources. And so the overreach by the left to restrict Trump supporters has consistently rebounded against them. Now, not everything they've done has rebounded against them. Right, the Russia hoax narrative, that was an effective way of hamstringing the Trump administration, distracting Donald Trump, limiting his ability to get anything done, and it effectively worked for about 3 years, even though there was very little basis in fact behind it. So I'm not making such a silly argument that everything the left does in reaction to Donald Trump is boomeranged against them. Right? They've done some things that are proven to be highly effective. And other things that have created unexpected repercussions that they are now ruling. Delicious. That's false. Everyone's not committing multiple felonies a week. LOL. Oh, just look it up. People routinely committing multiple felonies a week. There's a long essay in the Wall Street Journal on this argument, this point. Mitch McConnell drifts in and out of sleep when he speaks to, he's quite old. Is that some autumn foliage you see? Yeah, there is autumn in Southern California. It's just a different type of autumn. There are seasons in Southern California that are just not as dramatic as you see in most of the country. You're always going to have street scum. Well, no, not necessarily. Not if you punish scummy behavior severely, you will significantly reduce the amount of scummy behavior. Australia does not have these kind of problems. Europe has historically not had these kind of crime problems. Japan does not have these crime problems. We could reduce the murder rate and the violent crime rate to 10% of what it is now if we simply locked up the people who are committing these crimes, kept them in prison. Isn't the presumption that a quieter, less violent response is inherently superior? Well, in many situations it is superior, but in other situations it will be less effective. Aaron says, I quit Facebook the day they banned Donald Trump. So I got my COVID booster and my flu shot about 3 weeks ago. I'm a big believer in vaccines, also a big believer in free speech and open discussion. I can't find my wallet this morning, says Aaron. That sucks. I used to use a wallet, but I think the last 20 years I just use a clip. I think fewer people use wallets anymore. I can pretty much do everything I need to do just on my phone. So cash is used much less in Australia, I notice. People do almost everything on their phone there. I was freaking out between 2018 and after January 6th that there'd just be less and less free speech available on social media for live streaming. And the conservative commitment to creating alternative platforms and then taking over X under Elon Musk has been a pleasant surprise. Like Odyssey works pretty well. DLive, Kick.com has very little moderation. This actually has wide open speech on Kick. It's a fun platform, largely paid for by gambling. BitChute. So no signs that Trump momentum is slowing. Right, Sean Spicer did his show last night, his last show, the Path to 270. And looks like Donald Trump will sweep the Sunbelt states of North Carolina and Nevada. There are 4 Sunbelt states, I'm forgetting 2 of them. Election will likely come down to the blue wall of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Kamala Harris has to sweep those 3. It's hard to see how she can win if she doesn't sweep those 3. Out of those 3, Trump looks strongest in Pennsylvania. So he's maintained a lead in Pennsylvania for months now. Very small lead. Mark Halperin still holding by Trump's the favorite to win. And he's trying to expand the map. If he wins either New Mexico, Nevada, Virginia, New Hampshire, right, that would shift the odds significantly in his favor. He's campaigning in those smaller states. North Carolina and Georgia look like very much on the edge, but now Republicans are increasingly sure that Trump is going to win North Carolina and Georgia. So Republicans seem supremely confident as we head into Election Day, and Democrats are filled with distress. I was a combat journalist for 8 years in the U.S. Army. I'm retired now medically. I'll tell you, freedom of speech is definitely important. Yeah, when you tell the police that they're not wanted, that they should dial back on their enforcement, because when they enforce the law, it's racist. When you incentivize the police to back off from doing their jobs, that creates an explosion of crime. 4 distinct seasons in Southern California: fire season, flood season, mudslide season, and nut season. I'll talk to you blokes later. Bye-bye.